Sorry, guys, we had to restart the timer because we have lost our guest. We're trying to get him back on Skype. We'll try to get up as soon as possible. Apologize for the wait.
Talk
All
about
right, sorry, guys. We're having some technical difficulties here. Uh, James, I think we finally got James on now, so awesome. But anyway, I think we've got it all worked out, James. Hopefully the audio sounds good out there and everything. So uh, that was like right there at the last minute. So anyway, we got James Lallande here. He's a good friend of ours, good friend of the shop. He's also you know on the What's y'all's podcast? Oh, Final Gravity. I had a brain fart there. So
Final Gravity.
yeah. So anyway, if you guys have watched any of the Come and Brew It episodes, you'll know that you've seen James there on or listened to James and Brandon. And so he's a level 2 Grandmaster BJCP judge, so he knows a little bit about what he's doing. So what we're going to talk today is about. I think that's one of the common things that people often really get confused about when they're interested in making mead. They don't know a lot about mead. So James is really well versed in this. I think he just won. Was it last year you won a medal in the nationals, or was it year before last?
Yeah, it's been a few years since I've won nationals. I've won a few at Blue Bonnet. Right. It's a fun hobby.
Yeah, for sure. But anyway, James, why don't you tell us just basically a little bit about what mead is,
Okay.
and then maybe tell them a little bit about how to get started mead making.
Absolutely, 100%. We'll go into a few of the kickers and even sample a little bit while we're here. I know mead has not necessarily been one of the things that you're as big on, but I've turned your head a couple times on a couple of them, and
Yeah.
as long as they're not overly sweet. So I brought two different ones to try. Before I dive in too fast, we do want to mention out on the shop site we have a blog that I wrote on introduction to making mead and some of the key steps. Many people dive into making mead and think that, oh, I can just pour it all together and it's like making Kool-Aid. That is true. You can definitely dump everything together and go, or you can take your time, just like when you're brewing a batch of beer. And if you take the same meticulous time, you're going to find out it almost takes you the same 4 to 6 hours to make a batch of mead. So what is mead? It's honey wine. It is really more in the wine family. You treat it and ferment it like a wine. You want to make sure that you follow all the steps, very similar to making a wine, except for you're not using grapes, you're using honey. Honey is very low in nutrients, so you're using honey, water, and then some nutrients to help the yeast do their job. If you just dump everything together, then you're going to find you're making rocket fuel. And that's something that we've learned a lot over the last few years at making mead, is it's more than just dump and go. And so mead was, while it's one of the oldest beverages, fermented beverages out there, it still was very unknown. There's been a lot more studies go into definitely wine, and many more studies going into beer, but mead hasn't really taken off as much. And there's very few books out there. The Complete Mead Maker is good. I know that there's more advancement since then, so it just takes time. The fun part of mead is it's very dynamic. You know, Stevie, we talk about beer all the time. It's bitter and sweet, and you got to balance the bitter and sweet. Yep. Well, mead is a six-headed monster. You got tannins, you got sweet, you got acidity, you got alcohol, all of that, and then you got age comes in. So all of those things come to play.
Absolutely.
So I gave you a bottle that's a clear one, right?
Yeah.
It's a yellow one.
Yeah, I got it.
Why don't you open that?
Okay. I think I see it right here. Is that the one? Yeah, right?
Let me kind of give a comparison with beers. We look at hops. So hops are hops, but yet anybody that's made beer for a while, we know that hops are not just hops. It depends on where they're grown, depends on the soil. Very much, I say this all the time in classes, that you can have Hallertauer hops that is typically a floral hop, but they are different depending on the soil, the water, just like growing roses. While roses may all smell the same, they all a little bit different depending on where you grow them at. So this one that I brought out is my favorite. It's my favorite honey to work with. It's mesquite. So down here in Texas, we can get lots of mesquite, and it's easy to get. And so it depends on where the bees live based on the type of honey that you're going to find. And so this one here is the Southwest Texas. They're living in mesquite orchards, and it gives a real woody. We think of mesquite from a barbecue standpoint and go smoky. Well, This is not smoky. It's kind of more woody like. You kind of almost think a little bit of reminiscent of Northern Brewer hops.
Okay. Yeah, it's definitely got some mesquite character. I like mesquite. I mean, it does taste like the mesquite honey for sure.
No, no, by no means. And so, you you start out. Generally speaking, I like to go 1 gallon of honey and 2.5 gallons of water. So that's 1 part honey, 2.5 parts water. You can go a little bit stronger by going 2 parts water. Anything less than 2 parts water really starts to put it to a level where the alcohols or the yeast can't go through that much and still leave you with a drinkable product. You can get further, but if you get too sweet, even a dry mead is sweet. So when I talk beer sense, we look at it what around a 10, 12, 10, 14. You start getting some sweetness. Well, think about if you got a product that has no balancing bitterness, that's very sweet. And so in the mead world, that's a dry mead. But we're at 10, 12, 10, 15, and when you're only tasting honey, then that sweetness is very sweet. So every mead that you get for the most part is going to have a certain amount of sweetness, like a dessert wine, looking much like a dessert wine.
One of the things I think here is kind of you can kind of parlay into this. I think this is neat from your mead making 101 is why does mead often taste like rocket fuel? And I think that's a key part to mead making is yeast management. Maybe you can go into that a little bit for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeast management is the key. You have to have a lot of yeast, very much like when we're making a big Russian Imperial Stout, all of your lagers. You really got to take care of yeast. Well, for mead, it's a slower process, but you still got to keep that temperature down, and there's not a lot of nutrients within honey, so you've got to feed it. You got to give your yeast lots of oxygen. You have to give it lots of nutrient so that way that yeast can do its job. If you don't, you deprive it, then it's going to just rip through your sugars. And these sugars are all simple sugars. So we have no complex sugars when you're talking mead. It's 100% simple. So just like when we make those big Belgian beers, if you ferment it at 60, 70 degrees or between 60 and 70, you're good. You ferment it at 80, it's going to go through and it's going to be fusel and it's going to be hot.
Right.
And so managing temperature and also quantity and nutrients. You got to take your time. You got to give your yeast a little bit to play with. If you try to starve them, then you're going to have a hard time. Same thing lager brewers learned a long time ago. You've got to put a really big pitch of yeast there. Well, the same thing with meads. Now, meads, you're going from a really light starter all the way up to a 11 to 1150 wort. So you're going into or I say wort, it's really a must, but you're going into a very, very high sugar content. So you got to give it a chance to let your yeast get used to their environment. In the beer world, it's no different. There's that phase, that adaptation phase, when yeast hit that new, really nutrient-rich and sugar-rich environment. They've got to adapt. They got to get used to condition before they can start eating up the oxygen and splitting and growing further. So in my process and what most people are now doing in the mead world is a staggered nutrient addition, but also take your time at the very beginning. I like to build up from a little bitty old 1 cup worth of a proof, which is a proof is a 104-degree water with a pinch of sugar. And just like you do with bread, put your yeast in there and let it to start growing, let it start moving. And then I'll add just a little bit of that must at a time. And so maybe another cup, and then keep doubling it until I can get about a half a gallon worth of that starter. So like I said earlier, it's not just a 30, 40 minutes. Well, sanitizing all the equipment, plus having multiple vessels so you can bring it up from 1 cup to a pint to a quart to a half a gallon. You just want to build it up. That's going to take time. And each time you add, then the yeast will kind of get shocked a little bit by you adding more sugar to it. So then they'll start to foam up again. Give it, 15 minutes to anywhere around 30 minutes. They'll start foam up again. You'll see them getting active. And when you start seeing them getting really active, you add a little bit more. And by doing that, you're getting the yeast, excited. They're awake. They're ready to go. Kind of use it in the exercise terms. If you don't go stretching, just go for a run, you're likely to pull something. Well, if you're talking about wanting to invest $60 to $100 worth of ingredients into a 3-4 gallon product, you want to make sure that you give it a chance to work and learn how to deal with that new environment. And if you take care of that and keep your temperature down, then your yeast are healthy. They go through a very healthy fermentation. They don't produce a lot of fusel alcohols, and they don't produce a lot of other off flavors. The acidity stays in balance. Your tannins can stay in balance, and your product comes out quite a bit better and drinkable in 4 to 6 months.
Yeah, that's a big point. Most people think, oh, it takes over a year, in order to produce a really good quality, beer. So, I mean, excuse me, mead. But I think you're right in the point that, where that's the biggest issue with mead making, I think, is yeast management. Even so with lager brewing, like you said. So.
Yep, that's exactly right. And you can make lagers. I mean, professional brewers are making lagers in a very quick time, but that's because they're taking care of those first hours. We're not even talking days. We're talking about taking care of those first hours. That's the most critical part of mead making, and really with all fermentation, is make sure you take care of the beginning, get through the first day to 2 days, and then allow it to do what it needs to do. I will manage my fermentation for the first 3 days, checking it every day, especially if I'm starting to do something with some fruits and do real whole fruits. You have to manage that fermentation. Otherwise, you get a fruit cap on top of it, and it builds up heat. And I'll talk about that in a little bit when we get on the next one, because that's some of the fun of with mead is you have so many different varieties. For a new mead maker, I would tell you dive in and go get you some orange blossom honey. It's a really fantastic, flavorful honey that gives a lot of character. Wildflower honey works good, but the wildflower is different. So wildflower in Fort Worth in April is different than wildflower at Fort Worth in May. We talk 3 to 4 weeks difference, and it's different just because the floral source is different. And every time you change the floral source, then the honey changes. I've seen honey that is almost white water clear as can be, like if they're near cotton fields. And then if they're near a buckwheat field, it's dark, looks like and tastes like molasses, which is one of my more favorite ones as well. Orange blossom is really a good honey. It's easy to get. That's the other, because oranges are so plentiful. It's probably one of the easiest varietals you can get. You can get it at a reasonable cost, and it'll make a very nice mead for you. If you want to dive into mead, I'm going to make the suggestion: go ahead and dive in with a full gallon. Yeah. Make yourself about 3.5 gallons, so that way at the end of the day you have enough there. If you're starting out trying to make a quart of honey, making quarters of a gallon, you just don't have enough there, and you end up drinking it faster than it's truly ready.
Yeah. So I actually took the blog post that you wrote and actually posted it on the questions and answers section here. So if you guys want to go check that out, you can go on and read it. It has a little basic recipe in there and basically yeast management, kind of what we're talking about. So you guys can check that out. Also, we have a question here. How do you figure a gallon of honey when it's basically sold by weight? At least that's what I've gotten from Stubby, like a 3 pound bag or whatever. So is that like is a gallon about how many pounds? I guess would be the best
Gallon
one.
is 12 pounds.
Okay.
And so if you're getting a 3 pound, you're basically getting a quart. And so I just go with it there. It may vary by such a small amount, a couple of tablespoons. The water content in honey is pretty stable, so you don't have a situation where it's varying a whole lot. 12 pounds will get you a full gallon. If you're buying a three, you're making a quart, so you really add in another 2.5 quarts, so you're a little shy of a gallon, which is okay. Your end product is going to give you, if you like the little small bottles, it's going to give you what, about 15 to 18 for 3 pounds, which is, it's nice. If you're using the small bottles and you made a whole gallon, then you can end up having 2 cases of those small bottles.
I think these are really nice. I'll try to show these people online. These are the little 187 champagne bottles, 187 milliliter. You can find these on the site. These are really nice because they're smaller amounts, so you don't have to drink a whole bunch at one time when you open it. And also, these are accepted in competition, I believe. Is that correct?
Nearly every competition now accepts these. Drinking a full 12-ounce bottle is a lot of mead. Just with it being sweet, no different than when you get your sweet wines, your port wines.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times they last you a lot longer, and these will do the same. Unlike a beer, you can recap them and have no issues with storing them for a few days once you've opened them.
Unless it's carbonated, though, right?
Well, yes, unless it's carbonated, and I like to carbonate mine a little bit, so the next day it's going to lose a little bit of that carbonation. Mm-hmm. But many meaderies, you walk in and do a tasting, and they're sitting out on the counter, and they've had them out for a week.
Yeah,
I don't know. That's very common.
Because so you have still, petulant, carbonated. I mean, there's like lots of different ways to do mead, right?
Still, petulant, and petulant is not many bubbles at all, just a little bit of carbonation. That's what I like to make mine. I like to add a little carbonation. One, it gives a little bit of acidity to balance out the sweetness, but it also gives it a little bit more to burst the aromatics and let you smell it a little bit more.
Sure, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Now, that was really nice. What is the ABV on this particular one, James?
It's somewhere around 12, 13.
Wow. Okay, that's why I feel warm in the face a little bit.
Oh yeah, it's and it's semi-sweet. So as you can tell, it's still sweet. It finished at 1022 with no hop bitterness. If you can see, it's very sweet the same way, and you're tasting nothing but honey.
But that is a possibility too. You can add hops to mead as well, right?
You can add
hops to mead.
Well, yes, absolutely you can. There's a meadery that I really like up in New Hampshire, and they make a hopped blueberry, and it's actually their sweetest mead, but it tastes very well balanced because they use hops. They are pulling some of those acid to kind of balance it out.
Right.
And it's important. And if you find your mead is too sweet, you can add just a little bit of acid blend. So bringing up a little bit of acid will balance out all of that sweetness. So there's multiple ways to balance. Oak can add tannins, adding acid blend, a little bit of carbonation. Like I said, it's a multi-faceted flavor profile for meads, whereas beer is a kind of linear direction. And then what really gets fun, and what we'll do just a minute, is we'll start playing with one that has fruit and spices. Yeah. You start playing with other ingredients that will help you really balance out what you're doing.
This kind of plays on what we were just talking about. Got a question here from Randy Johnson. He says, what ingredients are okay in mead? If I add hops, does that make it a beer? And I wouldn't say it is unless you add beer base, right? And that would be a braggot.
A
braggot, right?
That's the fun part of mead. That's the fun part of mead. It is carte blanche. Do whatever you want to do. Go in and you can add any kind of fruit, spices, hops. You can add malt. Adding malt to it, if you keep the honey content at 50%. Now, it depends on who you talk to. But you talk to me, I'm going to tell you it needs to be 50% honey to truly be 100% of a braggot. And I think that the honey should be the showcase. But now you get brewers all the time that are selling a honey beer and they're calling it a braggot. So we won't go into that debate. We'll go blue in the face and argue and go that way. But you can use malt to add. You can add any kind of fruits. You can add any kind of spices. So one of the fun things with mead and adding fruits, the technical term is a melomel. But it's still another mead, is you can add fruit in any format you can think of. You can add dry fruits. You can add frozen fruits. Some of my best, and what you're going to try in just a minute, Stubby, is made with frozen raspberries.
Okay.
There's juice out there. You see pure juices. You can use any pure juice that you want to use. The typical rule of thumb is for all fruits except strawberries, you want to ferment the fruit with the honey and the fermentation. Strawberries you add after the fact. And with spices, you do the opposite. You always add spices after your fermentation. Okay. So I like to, with spices, make a tincture. I don't ever like to spice the whole batch. And I'm the same way with beer. If I were going to make a vanilla porter, I'm going to spice half of it, and I will intentionally overspice it. But spices can change by the hour. So it's very, very hard to stop a spice that dead on where you want it to. Sometimes you get lucky, but it's hard to stop it exactly where you want it to. So if you have it as a tincture or you have it as a partial batch, then you start blending together. That's one of the fun parts of making mead is blending works very well. So in the beer world, blending, it works, but the reality is if you have a batch that just isn't right, it's a little too bitter, a little too sweet, it's best to make a new batch and go and make some adjustments. With mead, if you get a batch that's a little bit too sweet and you have a batch that's a little bit too dry, blend them together and go with it. Yeah. Very, very forgiving.
So we have Barry Forrest here, and he says we should make a taco mead.
No. Why not? I mean, you want to use a little cumin.
It's based on the taco beer, you know.
Well, yeah. So that's a funny one. In our little local Fort Worth competition, we have Iron Mash, and one time we got some kind of taco spice. I don't know if it was.
Yeah, it was cumin. Yeah, it was cumin.
It was cumin, and it was a lot of fun. That's what we did. We made a taco beer out of it.
All right, so let's drink this other one, dude.
Let's drink this other one. So this other one is red. Go ahead and show it up. It's nice, bright, beautiful red, and it gives you an extra little kick on the end because it's not only raspberry; it's raspberry chipotle.
Raspberry chipotle. I think I've had this one before. Have I not?
You might have.
At a Christmas party, maybe?
Yeah, that's where you would have had it. Yeah, absolutely. So I use both techniques here. I fermented with the raspberries, in the honey and all the must. And then when it was done, I added chipotle. So I basically took a quart jar and put a whole bunch of chipotles and some of the base mead and just let it sit and sit and sit. And then I found out that for a gallon and a half or 2 gallons, whatever I wanted to make at the time, it needed, say, a cup or 6 parts to 1 ratio. So I just sat there with a dropper and tried to figure out what my ratio was and then blend them together. And you'll find
awesome.
This one
is interesting. You get kind of this the fruit flavor up front, and then you kind of get that smoky, not really even like capsaicin or heat at all, I don't believe. I mean, it's just got a little smokiness from the chipotle, right?
Yeah, the heat comes in at the end very light. But what's different is this one is probably very close to the same finishing gravity as the last one. It doesn't taste that way. All that raspberry acidity balances it out very, very much. And so that's where you can kind of play with it.
Oh, that's great, man. I'm liking it. And that means a lot when I say I like mead.
I see. I knew that. Trust me. When we said we were going to do this, I have to throw the gauntlet down. If you go back and look at some of the archives of the Come and Brew It Radio, we did a Mead show, and I think I pulled out 8 to 12 maybe Meads that we just went through and had a good time. And Stebby kept going, no, oh wait, that one.
Yeah, that one there.
One. Well, now here's 2. So this is fun.
Well, and here, James, I think here's the problem I typically have with with Mead that I do not like. A lot of times is they taste medicinal to me, so they'll taste like phenolic or like medicine. I hate that. And I mean,
Yes.
what does that come from, the honey?
No, that's coming from your fermentation. It's not healthy.
Yeah.
It's coming from the fermentation, not healthy, and then it's probably sweet. So you add the phenolics and the sweetness, and it starts tasting like cough syrup.
Yep, that's exactly what my point I was trying to make.
Absolutely can do that.
Yeah. So anyway, that's those are some things too to think about. When you're doing that, and I think the way that you avoid that, and that's one of the things that you've taught me, and it goes to the same thing even with high gravity beers, high alcohol beers, lagers. Your yeast management is so important to make sure that you're managing properly, have the correct amount of yeast and all of that. So, and I think the same thing plays with the mead for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's fun, I just started talking about it earlier, is just the blending. You want to make a raspberry, you want to make a blueberry, and it depends on who you talk to. School of thoughts can be different. I'm of the belief of, if I want to make a 3-berry, then I'll make 3 separate batches and then start blending them together to figure out which balance works out. A lot of times I've judged and somebody's got 3 different berries in there because they fermented it with 3 different berries, and one of them is gone, just completely lost. Especially, if you do a blueberry, raspberry, blackberry, do a triple berry like that, the blueberry goes away. You can't find it. It's hard to find. They're all, and then especially blueberries and blackberries are very, call it generic berry-like. Raspberry has a strong flavor that is out there.
We had a little quick show yesterday about fruits, or no, it wasn't yesterday. It was the day before yesterday. And
yes.
we think that I think the reason, and one of the questions came up was fruit. Why do some fruits have more flavor and other fruits don't? And I think a lot of that has to do with acidity level. So I think your raspberries have a lot more acidity than maybe, let's say, a peach or something of that nature. So when that sugar ferments out, it still leaves that acidity character behind.
Well, and fermentation, it's violent. It's hard on those flavors. I mean, we even get that with the hop flavor. You can do a huge hop burst at the end, and then fermentation gets rid of a lot of that flavor. It happens on a regular basis, and we're used to that. And so that's one of the things that can be interesting as you're playing with beers, fruit beers, and with meads, is making sure that you adjust. A lot of times you just simply have to add more fruit after fermentation. With beers, I like to add my fruit after fermentation. With meads, if you add them after fermentation, it can get a little jam-like. Michael Fairbrother, look-alike and friend of mine, that's where he'll tell you. He says, with all fruits except strawberries, you have to ferment the fruit. Now it changes your end product, but there's some meaderies up north that do the opposite. All they do is after fermentation, they'll add the fruits, and yes, I get some of that jam-like, but that's what they like. And so you have so much room for flexibility.
Here's a question from Barry again. He says, could you ferment the fruit juice by itself and then blend that into the mead?
I don't see why you can't. I mean, you're basically making a country wine and then blend it. I don't know that I would, but there's no reason you can't.
I don't think there's a rule against it or for it, right?
And that's the fun with me. There's no rules. There's no, how you pronounce it, Reinholzgebot. I'm not German, so I'll never pronounce that right. So don't hold it against me.
Reinheitsgebot. I believe is how
Yeah,
you say
but
it. Right?
no, there's no rules. It's just out there, and that's what can get fun. And think of crazy flavors, and you can add them to your meads. I have recently started diving into the world of kombucha and looking at those forums and just the wild ass. And we're not FCC rated, right? So
It
I
don't
can say
matter.
wild ass. Uh,
You're good.
Recipes that people are putting out there, and it starts to make me think. You could do that with meats. There's no rules. The hard part is meat can get expensive.
Yeah, it's
The,
expensive.
it's expensive no matter what. I mean, per bottle, it adds up. Usually about, like I said, about $60 is a good gallon price. Um, and so you're making 3.5 gallons. That's really not a lot of product. And so when you start adding spices, which equally can be expensive, you start putting a lot into it. So making smaller batches or making a big base batch and then splitting it and spicing it after the fact, that can be a lot of fun. That was been really one of my projects over the last year and a half, is to start exploring with other than traditionals. I went about 3 to 4, maybe more like 5, 6 years of mostly traditionals, only varietal honeys, and then recently started diving into fruits and spices, and it gets to be a lot of fun. Depends on what you like. You have
Sure.
it's carte blanche. It's a it's a canvas, an open canvas to make whatever you like.
Well, and that's something maybe we could get. That might be a fun little show to do. Is maybe have you and old Cedric get on here and talk about booch.
Boy, I'd love to. I'd love to.
Okay.
I'm still very new at it, but what's been fun with making kombucha is all of the things I've learned from making mead carry over so easily. And it's kind of funny because I watch forums on Facebook and kombucha forums, and you start looking at people like, these guys don't know how to brew. It's very clear. They're having issues. They don't understand sanitation. And with mead, sanitation is equally as important. You want to treat it exactly like a beer. And like I said at the very beginning, set aside the same amount of time you would for beer. You can't jump into it thinking, an hour before bed, I'm going to knock this out. You need to dedicate time to where you're really taking your time and spending a few hours to build up that starter and get your yeast working. You really cannot make a starter like you do for a beer. So, at a beer, we can make a starter 2 days before and then have a nice healthy pitch and dump it. Well, with mead, it doesn't work that way, because you need the yeast to really be active, alive. You want them playing in the playground before you toss them into the Wrigley Field, right?
Absolutely. I think that's a good point with any fermentation. Really, though, is if you think about it. Um, I preach this all the time, and I know you've heard me say this, James. Is we don't necessarily make beer or wine or mead or anything. All we do is make the environment for these yeast to live in. And the worst thing that we can do for the beverage that we're making is basically stress that yeast. You got to make it happy. You're building an environment for it to live in, and you got to have that optimum environment for it to live in to make great product.
100%.
So, but anyway, yeah, man, I'm really enjoying the mead. It's nice.
I'm glad. That was my mission. That's why I put the halo above me.
Yeah,
So
the
that
guys
way
are going to
we
be
have this
pissed because
big
I drank
light.
all of this one. So
The raspberry.
no, the first one, and
Oh,
then I got to thinking. I was like, oh yeah, I was going to share some with the guys, and then I drank it all. But you got any closing stuff that you would like to talk to people about real quick, or?
no, I guess just to close it out is dive in, take your time. Number one, you have a resource. So if you do want to learn how to make mead, go get that blog, start with it, read it, and then you can find me. It's easy to find me. Of course, I'm tagged on this video, so now it's even easier. Just go ahead and reach out. I'm here to help. You're going to find, and I think Stubby will attest to this, anything I know, I'm willing to share. I'll tell you everything I know and help you out, help you get going. Don't start making mead unless you have amazing temperature control. And we say that with beer nowadays too, but don't start unless you have good temperature control, and don't start unless you're going to spend the first 3 days really giving it time to baby it. And you're gonna see that in that blog. It gives you all the little steps that I use. There's no main secrets. You can read most of those anywhere, but you got to take about 3 or 4 pieces together to get to my method. But go ahead, use it. Reach out to me. I'm here to help. I'll help in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
All I ask is eventually pull me aside and say, "Here's one of those meads I made. Let's try it."
Yeah, for sure, man. And you're a great person in the community. James has done a lot to really build up the judging community here in Dallas Fort Worth. It's quite amazing, dude, what you've done here. I was shocked at Bluebonnet this year. It's a damn shame that it had to end the way it did and getting canceled. But up until then, man, the judging was unbelievable, and I attest a lot to you, man. So that's pretty awesome what you've been able to accomplish here. So, and as always, you always treat. Make sure to listen to the Final Gravity. You can find it on our Come and Brew It page. I think we've got 4 episodes uploaded now. I think I've got one more to upload for you, and I think we have some beers for to drink too.
We need to get back on it. This seclusion has been tough.
Yeah, no doubt.
But maybe this is a good way that Brandon and I can do it virtually the same way. Why not?
Yeah, maybe we need to look and see if we have more than one beer of each. If that was the case, maybe we could just split them up and you guys could do something like this, or we could call in all of us. But
I'm all in.
All right, sounds good, buddy. Well, like I said, if you have any questions and you guys need any help, you can always contact us here, 682-647-1267, or you can reach us at info@texasbrewinginc.com or our chat service. And we're here to help you any way we can. Even if I know James is willing to help as well. So if you have a question, you can send it to me and I can forward it to him, or vice versa, and we'll get you guys taken care of. But thanks again, James.
Cheers.
Appreciate it, buddy. Thank you so much for coming on, and this is about the best way we can do drinking nowadays together. So I'm getting used to this whole thing. I used to hate video conferencing, and I'm starting to get used to it now.
I have too.
All right, buddy. We'll see you soon, okay?
All right, good one.
Cheers.